Okay, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar. It's being organised as part of the Psychology Virtual Work Experience powered by us here at SpringPod. Really hope that you've been enjoying the programme so far, if you've been cracking on with it already. Don't forget, if you ever need any support, you've got any questions you need answering, then please contact a member of our team using the green chat icon, the bottom right hand corner of the platform. Someone would be happy to help you out there. Okay, just before we start the seminar, the talk should last roughly around 30 to 40 minutes. We will be doing plenty of Q&A, so please send your questions in. Our guest today would absolutely love to answer them, so get those flying in. And if you see a question that you definitely want answered, then use the upvote function. That'll get it to the top of the list. We can definitely get that answered today. And if you do miss the webinar, not to worry, or you need to leave halfway through, absolutely fine. We're recording this, so if Betty will get it up within about 24 hours of doing this live stream, so you can always come back, watch it on demand, no problem at all. If you are joining us live today, then hello and welcome. Today's webinar, we're going to be talking about clinical psychology, and joining us just to do that is Dr. Hazel Harrison. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I think I've got the technical stuff sorted now, so I'm not hearing you as an echo. So that's making me feel great. There's some good stuff we can talk about there about what happens in our brain when we have a delay in our communication. But we can probably get stuck into that. But yes, I'm very pleased to be here. I'm looking forward to answering some questions, so please do put your questions in the chat box. I'm going to talk for a little bit about my journey into clinical psychology, but I'm also really hoping to hear your specific questions and hopefully be able to answer those.
Amazing. Well, over to you. I'll let you talk on, and then we'll come back in with Q&A.
Okay, so hi, I'm Dr. Hazel Harrison, and I trained as a clinical psychologist, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that process has been like for me, and also to, I guess, highlight some of the places where maybe my roads have diverged and I've gone off on a slightly different tangent, to give you also that flavour of what psychology can bring to your own careers, how it's enhanced some of the choices that I've made in terms of where I am now. So I first discovered psychology at school. I did A-level psychology, and I have to say it was one of the first subjects where I just felt this really powerful sense of fascination. I just wanted to learn more. I was just so excited about this idea that we could understand the human mind, that we could start to tap into why we think and feel and behave in certain ways. And also the idea that it's coming from a place of research and science. And so it's not just our gut feeling about understanding how humans behave, but actually through vigorous studies and building on previous studies that we can start to really make sense of the complexities of the human mind and the things that make us kind of uniquely human. So it was really at A-level that I started to get fired up about psychology. But I think it's also really important to say, you know, you don't have to do psychology at A-level to then go on and study it later on. Maybe it does help. And I know some people now are doing GCSE psychology studies as well. I think all of these things will obviously be building your knowledge and skills base, but it's definitely not essential to have done those things in order to go on and study it at university. After I'd finished my A-levels, I took a year out, and in some of that year, I worked with people who had learning difficulties to start to give me a bit of a sense of what it would be like to work with different client groups, to start to feel where I maybe felt like it was my strengths and my areas of interest, and just to get some work experience as well, really. So I did that for about 6 months, and then I also had 6 months kind of doing other things that I was curious about too. And I then went to the University of Leeds to study psychology and media. And I think for me, I was still in this kind of place of thinking, I know I love psychology. I'm really fired up about it. I'm really interested in it. But I also really love sort of photography, and I'm interested in radio and TV. And so I found this kind of really great balance that worked for me of other areas that I suppose I was curious about and I wanted to learn more about. And it's interesting that some of that has kind of come full circle, because I've definitely needed some of those media studies that I was doing at university to support what I'm doing now with my own business. And we'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of this. So when you study psychology, generally it's about 3 years. And I was really lucky that at the university that I went to, I was able to also do placements again. So that kind of opportunity to spend some time with clinical psychologists and start to learn a bit about what their day-to-day life looks like, what they do in their job. Because I think we also probably carry around with us a lot of myths about what psychology is and what psychology isn't. And I think that was really helpful for me in sort of busting some of those myths and starting to realize, like, it's not like not everyone has a big couch in their office where people come and lie down and talk about, you know, all of their life experiences. That actually psychology can be much more kind of embedded and active in different organizations. And it doesn't necessarily look like therapy, for example, which some of us may imagine when we talk about clinical psychologists. Although, of course, that can be a part of it, that's definitely not the whole of it. So after I finished my degree, I was really lucky enough to be offered a placement with one of the schools that I'd been working with to get some of that work experience over the time that I was doing my undergraduate. And actually the school that I had been working with was a specialist therapeutic school over in Boston, Massachusetts. And they asked if I'd like to go back and work over there for another year. And that was really great experience for me. That is not necessarily essential in terms of the sort of typical clinical psychology path. But I was really excited about spending a bit more time in a therapeutic school, starting to understand a bit more about supporting children who had additional needs. These were children who'd experienced trauma and had certain difficulties in being in school, and so would need more support from staff and more of an assessment and understanding of what some of the challenges were, so that we could help them to thrive at school and to really get the most out of it. So I had a great year working over there and working with a team of psychiatrists and psychologists and play therapists and art therapists. And that gave me not just that understanding of what a clinical psychologist does, but that broader understanding of how a clinical psychologist can sit within a team, and the essential role that all of those different people play in helping to support the children and young people that we were working with. But you'll often find that clinical psychologists are in teams, even if you're talking about adult services or older adult services. It's very typical that psychologists work with others, and it becomes a kind of more holistic, multidisciplinary approach to supporting people. So when I'd done that, I then came back to England and I spent another year working as an assistant psychologist. Now, this is the more traditional route that people tend to take if they want to become a clinical psychologist. So that was a year working in the NHS, getting paid, and working in a clinic. And I was working in a children's and young people's clinic around mental health. So supporting children who had difficulties with anxiety and depression, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. So these sorts of mental health problems that you may be familiar with, that you may have heard about. So then in that time, I suppose my learning was very much focused on understanding mental health problems and starting to learn a bit about how we might treat mental health problems and supporting those qualified clinicians in their work, which is pretty much what assistant psychologists do. So for most people who want to become a clinical psychologist, they do spend at least a year, sometimes more, working as an assistant psychologist after they've done their undergraduate degree. Sometimes it takes maybe 2, 3, 4 years until they're accepted onto a postgraduate program. And so a few of my friends who trained as clinical psychologists maybe spent a year working in one service, and then they moved and spent a year working in another service, and just started to gain experience. And I think that's what's also really exciting about being a clinical psychologist, and the pathway to becoming one, is that you have these opportunities to keep exploring different fields, to see what fits for you, to see what you're interested in, and to be able to kind of try it out a bit really whilst you're training. After my year over here as an assistant psychologist, I then went to the University of East Anglia to do my doctorate in clinical psychology. And again, that works in sort of tandem with the NHS. And so there are a certain number of places that the university offers. And sometimes you're in a university learning about the research and the academic and the theory. And sometimes you are in a clinic working with other clinical psychologists, being supported by qualified clinical psychologists who are helping you along that kind of training pathway. And so you are also earning money. So once you've done your undergraduate degree, beyond then, there are these points where you can actually start to do a job of a clinical psychologist, even if you're not fully qualified yet, with the support of others around you, and you can start to have a salary, which is, I think, is quite helpful, because otherwise, if you look at it sort of broadly and go, okay, so I'm going to have to spend 7 years learning how to be a clinical psychologist, that might feel quite daunting. But actually, I suppose what I want to communicate to you is that it isn't all that time of just being in university. There are opportunities to actually become employed with a NHS trust and to start sort of earning some money, to start deciding a bit more about the areas that you're interested in. So yes, it does take about 7 years from the undergraduate to the postgraduate, and you do have to write a thesis, and there is quite a lot of research that can be involved in your particularly in your doctorate. So there is an expectation that you will write a thesis, you will design some research, that you will carry out research. And that is part of being a psychologist, particularly at the start, is that understanding and recognition that although there is opportunities to apply your psychology within the field, there are also really important aspects of the kind of vigorous scientific study and learning how to carry out your own research, as well as reading other people's research and kind of thinking about how you can add to that picture. So that is kind of the process that you take until you then become a clinical psychologist. And traditionally then, clinical psychologists are found in places like outpatient clinics, hospitals, prisons, sometimes schools. So often within a community base, so that they are, as I said at the start, embedded within a team, a kind of multidisciplinary team where there'll be other professionals around you too, to make this kind of holistic picture of supporting those that you are working with. Clinical psychology evolved to be designed around the treatment of mental health problems. And that has been the kind of primary function of clinical psychology for many years, is understanding and assessing mental health problems, being able to diagnose what they are, and then working with people to offer evidence-based treatments. However, I think we have moved quite a long way away from that now. Even some of the diagnostic labels, some clinical psychologists don't use anymore. They're finding that it's much more helpful to perhaps describe the difficulties that someone is experiencing more in terms of a story and understanding what happened to them rather than giving them labels. I think our whole understanding of mental health has really shifted in the past decade, and we are probably still on quite a rapid development of understanding and growth in this area. So we probably will keep evolving and changing how we view mental health problems, particularly perhaps some of the labels that we use to try and assess and diagnose, and they will probably keep changing as we learn more and as we do more research. I took a slightly different path. I did go and work with the NHS for about a decade, and worked my way sort of up the NHS pay scales and different roles. And so you can start as a clinical psychologist and you become a highly specialized clinical psychologist, and you become a consultant clinical psychologist. And there are various different grades that you can work up within the NHS if you want to, which is the path that I sort of started to go on. But actually what I also started to feel was that there was a lot of research and evidence and theory that we as clinical psychologists understood, that we hadn't yet found ways to perhaps communicate to people who could use in a way that was more preventative. And I think for me that became something of a mission, and it has become my kind of very big mission now, which is how do we bring psychology out of these clinics and hospitals and these specific places and enable people to access this information more generally, so that we can all perhaps learn something more about how we take care of our mental health, how we can look after ourselves, how we can be more proactive in taking care of our mental health. And of course, we know loads about what we can do to look after our physical health. We know how important it is to get enough sleep and to exercise and to eat well. But we also have learned a tremendous amount about the importance of how we take care of our mental health, the importance of connecting with other people, of having a healthy balance of emotions in our day, of having activities that we can really feel engaged in, of creating moments of mindfulness where we can perhaps think about how we direct our attention, opportunities for kindness and giving to others that actually can give our own mental health a boost too. So I became really fascinated with some of the research around how we take care of ourselves, and what I've been doing over the past 5 years is actually trying to find ways to share some of that. It's been a really exciting journey for me. I've ended up making a little series on wellbeing for the BBC, which is available on BBC Teach. I've been working with BBC Bitesize. During the first lockdown in the UK, I was writing the wellbeing content for the BBC Bitesize daily lessons that were going out on TV to support children who were learning at home. And more recently, I've started working with the Premier League football to think with them about their wellbeing strategies and how we can perhaps communicate some of these ideas so that it reaches a bigger audience. So for me now, this mission of how we bring this science, how we bring this knowledge, these theories, these things that we know make a difference, to enable it to reach a kind of wider group of people, and I think enable people to really learn a bit more about how we can take care of ourselves and others too, has really become my driving sort of focus. So I don't work with the NHS anymore, and I've decided to go on a different path now, which is much more focused on prevention of mental health problems. So yes, you may well have lots of questions about that. I guess the other thing to say before we kind of move over to the Q&A part is that clinical psychology is just one part of psychology, and there are a lot of different sort of places and specialisms that psychologists can move into. Coaching psychology, for example, health psychology, sport and exercise, education psychology, occupational psychology. So if you want to understand the differences between these types of jobs and what they actually look like in practice, I would really recommend having a look at the British Psychological Society's website, where they actually have a whole section on careers and a bit of a flowchart of some of the different places where psychologists work, but also explaining what those roles are and how they might be different in the different settings. So how is a health psychologist different to a clinical psychologist, for example, or how is an educational psychologist different from an occupational psychologist? Because there will obviously be lots of crossover in terms of the things that we've been learning, but where we work and how we work might look quite different. So I'm going to stop talking now and hopefully hand over to some questions.
Brilliant. Absolutely amazing. Okay. Yes. If you've got questions, please send those in. We're going to start looking at them now. Got a question to start us off here. Are there any ways you can get work experience at 15/16 years old to get an insight into the career?
I think it's a great question. And I know that there have been some sort of shifts and changes in terms of opportunities for volunteering, say within the NHS. When I first started training, there were quite a lot of opportunities for doing work experience, but over time, some of that has changed. I think some of the safeguarding measures that have been put in place have made it harder for offering those kinds of experiences. But I think the thing about psychology is that it's about people. It's about understanding how people think and behave and feel. And I think any opportunities to work with other people, charities that you might be able to volunteer with, places where maybe there is a specific mental health focus, I would recommend just trying to find out, like, do you have a mind charity, in your location, perhaps getting in touch with them, asking them if you can go along one day and visit, just start having conversations with people. Even if you can't actually get that work experience, people, I think, are generally pretty happy to give up a little bit of their time to explain what they do or how they work. So just having those conversations might just open a few doors, or at least give a bit more insight into the different places where you can find psychologists.
Great. What good universities do you recommend for psychology? I know you mentioned, so do you go to Leeds? Did you say you went to Leeds?
I went to Leeds, and then I went to UEA. I think the thing about psychology is that you have to, if you want to go on and sort of study psychology and do your doctorate, you have to follow what they call the graduate basis of registration, which is the sort of design of what content needs to be covered in order for you to then carry on with your training. And so in effect, every university that's offering that graduate basis for registration should be covering the content that you need to learn. And if they're not, then that probably you should probably strike that off your list. But if they say that they're providing kind of the modules that are part of the graduate basis of registration, then I'm sure that they're going to have some differences in what they're offering, but they're all going to be following this sort of particular path of making sure that you get what you need to get to the next bit if you want to.
And you said when you was going in to sort of go back to do the doctorate, there's obviously limited places. How do you sort of stand out? How do you try and get those places and make sure you get in?
Yeah, I mean, it is fiercely competitive to become a clinical psychologist. I think for so many reasons. Obviously, it's a great job, but also because you're earning money as well as doing your training. So it's like you're having to go through that process in order to get a job as well as to get a place on the university course. So they're looking for people that they think would be ready or capable of sort of starting their course, and then quite soon after that, being placed in a hospital or in a clinic. But I think the ways that people do get there are through determination, by being resourceful in trying to find different ways to sort of get assistant psychologist posts, for example, recognizing that it might be a long journey. I applied once and I didn't get in. I applied when I was living in America. I hadn't worked in the UK. I got an interview, but I didn't get a place. And so when I came back to England, I knew that I needed to do that assistant psychology post to be able to get in. But I think it is very common to apply more than once. So that's the other thing I think, is recognizing it might take a bit of time. But in a way, I think the joy of that is that you're working and you're earning. And so if you've not got onto a clinical psychology course yet, you are still getting an opportunity to keep doing the work that you're interested in. So it's not like you're twiddling your thumbs kind of waiting for it to happen. You're probably already working as an assistant psychologist, or some sort of similar post that will help you to kind of take that next step. But it is competitive. There are lots of people that want to do it. I think you have to have a 2-1 or above from university. But again, the British Psychological Society has a page where it offers advice about what to do if you got a 2-2 and you still want to continue on this path. Often that looks like maybe going and getting a master's or some other sort of university qualification that will enable them to understand that you are capable of doing the next bit of study, really. So yeah, determination, I think, is a really big strength that's needed here.
Definitely. How do you separate yourself from your work so that clients' issues don't affect you personally? I like that question.
That's a great question. So it does take a while to learn. And definitely, I think in the early days, it's quite challenging because you're being confronted with so much newness, so many things that you've not come across before. And it's, I think, really normal for you to go home and to be thinking about these things and making sense of them. But one of the really important things that happens for clinical psychologists is they have something called clinical supervision, which is an opportunity to sit with qualified psychologists and actually talk about the clients that you're working with, making sense of those, making sure you've got a clear plan, having a chance to talk about anything you're worried about, and having that close relationship with someone who has got enough skills and knowledge to support you through that, so that hopefully they can also help you if you start to recognize that you're finding it quite difficult to switch off. But I think more generally, with any of our jobs that we might be doing, when we need to switch into kind of a home mode from a working mode, there are certain things that we can try to sort of signal to our brain that we've stopped working now and we are shifting into a different gear. Sometimes having that commute can be a very helpful way to sort of transition from one thing to another. But we can also use things like exercise or relaxation techniques to just kind of change the pace, to give ourselves that signal that we're in a different mode now. But it definitely can take time and practice, I think. And in the early days, I know I definitely had like evenings where I would still be thinking about the people that I was working with and just trying to kind of puzzle some of it out in my mind. But over time, that really shifted and changed. And I got to the point where I would leave work and most of the time be able to leave and not think about it until I came back the next day.
Yeah, I guess it's that funny thing where it's like you're trying to help other people's mental health, but you got to look after your own as well.
Definitely, you absolutely have. And I think that is crucial. You're wanting to give resource to other people. You're wanting to be able to be empathic, to listen well, to make sense of the things that they're struggling with. If you are not well yourself, if you've not had a good night's sleep, if you've, not eaten anything, or you've not, had a chance to just take a few deep breaths, that becomes really challenging. So I think you do very quickly have to start learning what you as an individual need to feel kind of topped up, and making sure that you are focusing on yourself as well as looking after other people.
And in terms of talking about what the client's sort of difficulties may be, what are sort of the common issues that have to be addressed that you find?
So generally, two of the most prevalent conditions that we would see in the clinic is anxiety and depression. So those are kind of two of the sort of most prominent mental health problems, I guess, that we struggle with here in the UK particularly. And you could perhaps add stress into that too, which we might start to find a sort of slight nuance between the differences between anxiety and stress. But typically, I think those two are the sort of most prevalent in terms of mental health problems.
And you say in terms of the UK specifically, is there big differences between the countries? Why is that?
I think there are some differences. I don't know specifically around sort of what the data would say, but I do, like, there are some countries where perhaps some of those labels aren't recognised in the same way as well, or that maybe they would use a different criteria in order to diagnose those things. And so I think that's why, psychology is also so fascinating. It's like, when we're talking about perhaps a specific physical health problem, then we can look at that through a microscope or in some way notice, or we can look at an x-ray and we can see that there's a bone broken there and we can all call it a broken bone. Mm-hmm. In psychology, there are real nuances in different places in the world as to how we understand and make sense of mental health problems, and also how we treat them. So so I'm saying the UK because I know that's my sort of knowledge base.
And how have you seen sort of the field progress since you've started?
I think sort of around the year 2000 was when we really started to focus a little bit more on understanding not just what, the sort of alleviation of suffering, but actually how we could help people to thrive and flourish, and what helps people to perform at their best and be at their best. And I think for me, that just became such an exciting area. We call it positive psychology as a sort of umbrella term, but it's really about how to enable people to live their best lives, to experience higher levels of life satisfaction, to have more kind of moments of joy and awe and inspiration in their day, to feel engaged in the things that they're doing. And I think for me, when we got that field really kind of developing, that was fascinating for me, because I recognized that there was so much that we could use from that might help those people who are struggling, but also to be able to think for us all how we can, look after ourselves.
Yeah, definitely a very interesting area. Had a question here. What's the best thing to do after you finish university with a psychology degree?
Well, I guess it just sort of depends on what you want to do next, and that is why I think it's really helpful to, if you can, have some opportunities to talk to psychologists and start to find out, what does a sports psychologist actually do, what does an educational psychologist actually do, connect with people, follow people on Instagram, start to get a flavour of how psychologists work in different fields. The England football teams we know now have clinical psychologists working with them. Where you can go and work, I think, is so diverse now, and really exciting. So I think the first sort of thing to do is to start to hone, what are you interested in? So you've got your psychology degree, you've got to that point where you can now choose a pathway. So what excites you? Which areas are you interested in reading about? You have to do a lot of reading and research. So don't go into an area that just sends you to sleep. You want to end up studying something that gets you fired up and that you're really interested in. So start to notice, where are those areas where I actually feel more energized when I'm learning about it, when I'm thinking about it. And hopefully your undergraduate degree will have given you a bit of insight into that. You maybe realize which lectures you stayed awake in versus the ones that you wanted to kind of nod off in.
Great. What A-level options, apart from, of course, psychology, do you think are good choices? Would ethics/morals be good? Ethics/morals, I don't think that was an option for me.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many great A-levels now, isn't there? I think, you are required to have a lot of different skills as a psychologist, including perspective taking and being able to kind of be a critical thinker. And I imagine kind of ethics and morals would be a really great way to enhance some of those skills. So absolutely, I'm sure that there'd be lots of crossover in terms of maybe being able to take that slightly more kind of analytical view and look at things from different perspectives, which is definitely something that you need to do. I know that some people also, perhaps if they're interested in health psychology or sport and exercise psychology, maybe start to explore some of the sciences as well, to make sure that they're kind of perhaps learning a bit more about hormones and how our brain works, and going down that route too. So yeah, I think the social sciences can be supportive too. Again, I think it's about that curiosity of what interests you. Definitely my advice would be, don't pick A-levels and things that you're not enthusiastic about, because you've got to study this stuff for a while, and you want it to be things that you can get stuck into.
Definitely. Is working as a clinical psychologist flexible? Do you typically have a set 9 to 5 style of work?
Well, I think we used to have a set 9 to 5 kind of work pattern, but I think so much has changed, particularly during the pandemic, that we've seen a great deal of flexibility even within my colleagues who work within the NHS. If you'd have asked me 5 years ago whether we would have been delivering sessions via Zoom, I would have said that was ridiculous, and there's probably no way we could do that, and we'd lose so much from not being in the room with someone. But we are learning how to do that, and whilst it may still not be as great as being in the same room, people have adapted to using the technology and the ways that we can to support people. And some people prefer having their sessions on Zoom than perhaps coming into a clinic. And for those that perhaps struggle with their mental health and find it difficult to perhaps navigate getting there or getting on a bus, or all the potential hurdles that might stop them from accessing help, lots of those have been taken away now for them, so that they can engage in their sessions with someone. So I think there is a lot more flexibility than we used to have, and I anticipate as technology continues to develop, it will maybe enhance our flexibility even more. Personally, I don't have a 9 to 5 schedule, but now I am the director of my own company, so I guess I'm getting to pick and choose a bit more, which projects I get involved in and the hours that I work.
You're the boss. You're the boss.
I'm the
now.
boss. But here we are at 6:30, so there you go.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I think just to finish this off, you teased it at the beginning, so I've got to bring it back up. You said about the lag, the delay in the brain or something like that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we found, and it's really nice now because I can see your face and lips moving as I can hear your voice. But one of the things that we found really quickly was that and they've done all kinds of studies where they've put a slight delay in between, when the person's speaking and then when the person's answering. And we get so much from this aspect of being able to kind of feel like we're in a real relationship, communicating in real time with each other. And when we start to add in this time lag, it makes our brain have to work much harder at trying to pick up on the subtleties of how we're communicating with each other. So if you smiled at something that I'd said, but your smile was slightly delayed, it would confuse me because it wouldn't feel kind of natural. And so then we actually get very tired when we're communicating like that, which is why it's great that technology is moving on so quickly to make it feel much more in real time. But even those kind of microsecond delays can make our brain feel a bit confused or overwhelmed, or just trying to make sense of the interaction as opposed to just kind of being in the interaction. And so that's why we can end up feeling quite fatigued after we spend a bunch of time on Zoom calls.
Amazing. Well, I think that's a wrap on the session. I think we could go on about it all night, talk about all different areas of psychology, but we do have to end there. So thank you for all your questions. And before we go as well, just a reminder to please get all your work submitted by the 12th of November. Get the program completed by then, and you could be eligible for your certificate. And if you need reminding of those dates, it's back in module 1. So head back there if you need reminding. Well, thank you, Hazel, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. And please do, if you use social media and you're interested in connecting with me, please do. I'm on ThinkAvellana. I think you guys have got the links there to share with people. But what I've been trying to do is share just little bite-sized tips about how we can take care of our well-being to keep us all in that journey of learning more and finding the things that work for us and letting go of the things that don't.
Amazing. Fantastic. Well, thank you for all your questions.
Thanks
as well,
very much.
And good luck with the rest of the program. See you later.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.